Welcome to Better Futures.
So how do you change that expectation in your society without some sort of level of collapse? It's taken us 100 years to get from you should be working all the time in the mines to 40 hours is acceptable. And you should always have Saturday and Sunday off, or at least to have a reasonable amount of time off. In Europe they have large chunks of vacation that are available to people. So they have moved down the path of people don't need to be working as much or as hard as the world gets better and better at providing basic needs for people. So how do you adjust your society to actually move towards whatever that goal might be? And each of these things are incremental. I'm not a big fan of moving forward in big lurches. And I think they have in countries that you have moved expectations for work. So maybe that's it. Maybe you do actually provide everybody with warm, dry, well-fed, and you have a decent portion of your society that's actually not at work. I don't know, but that discussion is yet to be held.
I think that it is a discussion that will be coming up.
Yeah.
Because thinking about how much productivity has increased and how much wages have stagnated since, say, 1980, and also thinking about how, to my understanding, office workers estimate that only about 2 hours a day are they actually productive or consider themselves productive.
Yeah.
So that's 25% of the typical office worker's working day. That's the only time that they're productive. 75% they're doing nothing. So perhaps the work week should be reduced to 10 hours.
Yeah, but then of course people do worry about the fact that if they're only working 1/4 of the time, well, if you're working 2 hours a day or going from 8 hours to 2 hours, well, now if you're only working 2 hours, are you only getting 15 minutes worth of legitimate work? Or half an hour's worth of, do my math here right, half an hour worth of legitimate work. And of course, I've had discussions with a number of my friends over the years on this. It's like, if somebody hires you for 8 hours, I have friends that say, well, I do as much in 2 hours as everyone else does in 8 hours. So I get to do my 2 hours worth of work and then just sit and read or be on my phone for 6 hours. And I do as much work as everybody else. So is that fair and legitimate? Or is your boss essentially hiring you to work for 8 hours and you're actually generating 8 hours even though the person next to you is really in 8 hours only generating what you would generate in 2 hours? So now you get back to the idea of, so what is fair? What is legitimate? And there are different people that are on all different sides of this, and in that particular example, my general feeling is like, well, I hired you for 8 hours of work, and if you're able to work 8 hours and produce 8 hours worth of work, you should be doing that, even though the person next to you is actually only producing 1/4 of what you would produce. However, there are a lot of people that are on the other side of that argument, so unknown.
All right,
So,
we'll just call it an open book for today.
right. I don't know. So, being a small business owner, when you hire somebody for 8 hours worth of work, you expect them to actually work 8 hours. However, a worker kind of looks at this from a totally different perspective. So how do you come together once again for what is fair within a larger context?
This is probably an ongoing discussion with so much difficulty filling open positions, or perhaps, put another way, how much bargaining power the labor has right now.
Right, and this changes also. It's, well, if labor's tight, then the labor has better negotiating. And so maybe this is really fluid. If labor's not tight, then they have less negotiating. So as you move on in time, this may actually not be a static answer. It may actually be totally based on supply and demand. But then there's a lot of people that's like, well, I don't necessarily want this to be based on a capitalistic principle like supply and demand. I want an assured set amount. I don't want to have to renegotiate these sort of things every couple of years, even though in practicality that's probably what's happening. So I don't know. And I think you're right. These things are all continual ongoing discussions. In the case of somebody that you hired, an employer has to look and say, okay, I've hired them both for 8 hours time. One actually only produces 2 hours worth of work. The other produces 8 hours worth of work. Well, now that 8 hours worth of work, that person says, I'm only gonna produce 3 hours. Well, the boss kind of looks at that and says, well, crap, I got this guy that's here 8 hours but on his phone for 5 hours and working for 3, or I've got this person that's working for 8 but actually produces 2 hours. So at that point, the employer has to say, what do I want? Do I fire the guy who's only working 3 hours and then 5 hours on his phone just out of principle? Just because I think he should be working 8 hours? Well, I'm really hurting myself because I'm getting 3 hours out of him and I'm only getting 2 hours out of the other person. I guess in that particular case, my feeling is it's kind of up to the employer. It's like, well, what do you think? Could he fire the 3-hour guy and hire another 8-hour guy and actually get 8 hours worth of work? You're always negotiating to get the best deal. So anyway, and a lot of these sort of discussions, I think, revolve around people that have power, an employer that has power and an employee that has power and that has options. In this current market where you have tight labor supply, the labor has the upper hand, and it's like, no, I want to work offsite and I want this sort of salary. However, there's a lot of people in our society that don't perceive they have the ability to negotiate and pretty much have to take what they get. And there are those that go to work for 8 hours and actually are only able to produce half hour's worth of reasonable work because they're just not capable of this. So there is, in a capitalistic society, you are kind of assuming that everybody can negotiate. But in reality, everyone is not able to negotiate. And you have a lot of people that can't negotiate or don't perceive that they have the ability to negotiate. This gets back to our idea of fair, that you have a voice, and that the consent and the expectation of the system that you are in. So capitalism is okay. The problem is that there tends to be people that don't do as well. One of the reasons, in my opinion, why there are rich people is because they got up this morning at 2 o'clock and they were reading all the business news, and now they're on the trading floor of the New York Stock Exchange and they're working their ass off, and they just know a lot about that. For the same reason my wife is a great piano player, because she sits and practices for 5 hours a day. Okay, so you just have different levels of ability and people's different interests. Some people are really interested in making money, and some people are interested in underwater basket weaving or whatever they might be interested in, or may not even be able to do anything other than, underwater basket weaving, or have no facility whatsoever with money, or even facility of understanding, in case of mental illness, even understanding reality. So how do you deal with these people that don't have a voice, but yet there's implied consent, and there's a wide group of people that do not do well in a capitalistic society? So what do you do with those people that their only ability is underwater basket weaving? Is it fair to actually relegate them to poverty because they don't have this ability, whereas someone who trades on the New York Stock Exchange and gets up at 2 in the morning, works their ass off for the next 16 hours and just makes a shitload of money? Is it fair that somebody who has this ability or is doing really well and the other is relegated to poverty? And I'm somewhat of an evolutionist. It's like, is it fair that a deer that runs slow is wiped off the face of the earth, but a deer that can run fast is not wiped off the face of the earth? Okay, this is adaptive to your environment, and I am somewhat a believer in that we are part of the larger environment, and we are subject to the laws of evolution also, just like, as a society and even on an individual basis. On the other hand, I'm not such a hardline evolutionist that's like, I'm sorry, if you can only do underwater basket weaving, you will be relegated to poverty. That seems a little bit harsh. So once again, we move into so what's fair? And once again, that you end up into, well, we have to have a discussion about what's fair. Well, some people are better at discussions than other people. And so how do we set up a governmental situation that gives the people the voice to determine what's fair? So, anyway.
All right. Well, that's my next question.
Okay.
For another time, though.
Okay. Anyway.
Thank you, Steve.
Yep.